Will Shackel joins us today. Good afternoon to you, Will. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me on.
What prompted this passion to bring nuclear energy to Australia, mate?
Well, look, I think it's a bit unusual for a young person to be interested in nuclear power, especially in Australia, because it's banned. And I think most of your listeners would agree that we're not really taught about nuclear power at school. So it actually was just by coincidence that I was doing some school assignments and I stumbled across nuclear power in grade 10. It took until then to realise that nuclear power was banned, and I guess I reflected on the fact that in Australia we're experiencing an energy and climate crisis, and it really baffled me why we would be excluding this energy source when you look around the world. That is one of the only proven ways to decarbonise a large country. So it made no sense to me why we would be ruling out a technology like nuclear power, and not being able to even consider it as an option just made no sense to me.
And across the last 2 years, have you figured out why the politicians don't like nuclear energy, especially those in the Labor and the Greens? Why do they not approve of nuclear energy?
Well, it doesn't make sense, because what their arguments are is that it's too expensive and takes too long to build. But truly, we don't know how much nuclear power reactors would cost in Australia, or indeed how long it would take to build nuclear power plants, because the industry just simply isn't interested in Australia at the moment because it's banned. Why would a nuclear power vendor be interested in making a proposal or submitting a business plan to the government when Australia's got one of the most hostile policies on nuclear power anywhere around the world? We're the only member of the G20, in fact, the top 20 economies in the world, which bans nuclear power. And most of those countries actually use it in order to provide them with low-cost, reliable, low-carbon power. So it just doesn't make sense. And it shouldn't have to be this way, because when you look around the world, nuclear power is a uniting issue. Already 32 countries around the world have nuclear power and have successfully used it to decarbonise their electricity. And in addition to that, there's a further around 30 which are interested in adding nuclear power to their mix. And when you look at the state of politics in other countries, say the UK, both sides of politics agree on nuclear power. So UK Labor supports it with their leader Keir Starmer, but also the Conservative Party there support it. You look even to the US, and I think we all know how divided politics is there, and how little things they agree on. And one of the things they do agree on is nuclear power. So both Biden, who has spent billions of dollars investing in nuclear power through his bipartisan infrastructure bill, but in addition to that, obviously the Republicans also support nuclear power. But when you come back to Australia, it's not actually seen as a uniting issue, which it should be, because nuclear sort of just ticks everyone's boxes. If you're concerned about climate change, it's a perfect climate solution. If you're concerned about energy security, it's one of the most reliable sources of power. It's a baseload source of power, but it also can help firm renewables. And in addition to that, you know, for the environmentalists out there, it has a really low land footprint, and because of its energy density, you don't need as many materials, you don't need as much mining, and you don't actually produce as much waste as other energy sources, which might also shock people. So it sort of ticks everyone's boxes, but unfortunately politicians have closed their minds to it in pursuing their tunnel visioned approach to the energy transition, which, you know, is untested. No nation has been able to decarbonise based on renewables alone. And whilst I support renewables, I think that we should be able to have all options on the table, and that we should be able to consider nuclear power as just one part of a broader energy mix.
Yeah, and you did go to COP28 in Dubai, and you actually asked Emmanuel Macron, he's the French president, what he thinks about the idea of legalising nuclear energy down under. Here is what he had to say.
I hope that you will manage to lift the ban. I mean, nuclear energy is absolutely a necessity to succeed.
Yes.
For carbon neutrality in 2050. I mean, now it's with the control of international domestic agency and with the best possible regulation. I think this is a fair and a good decision to relaunch nuclear capacities.
So he's basically saying that Australia should look into and decriminalise nuclear energy. For those who are concerned about the worsening climate crisis, and we are experiencing that here in Australia, we have bushfires. It's getting hotter and hotter. There's rainfall. There's floods in the eastern states. How would nuclear energy and nuclear power, how would that fix the climate crisis?
Yep. So I think what's really important to have all of your listeners be aware of is the fact that when I look at France at the moment, they're getting 99% of their power from low carbon energy sources. And specifically at this hour, 65% of it is coming from nuclear power. You then look back to Australia, and we've got some of the dirtiest emissions in the world. If you look at Western Australia, where you're in, only 40% of power is coming from low carbon energy sources. So if we want to solve climate change, I think we should be stealing off the notes of France and what they're doing. So in terms of how nuclear helps address climate change, first of all, it's really important to know that nuclear power is zero emissions. People probably have seen pictures of nuclear power stations and the big cooling towers, and have probably seen the black smoke or whatever coming from the top of them. It's not actually smoke, it's not actually emissions like a coal-fired power station, it's just steam. Because the benefit of nuclear power, how it basically works is through a process called fission, the splitting of the atom. And people describe, nuclear power stations as like a kettle, because it's basically just using that power, that energy from the process of splitting the atom, fission, to produce heat, which then boils water to produce power. And then that releases steam. So it's not actually carbon dioxide or greenhouse gas emissions being released into the atmosphere like fossil fuels, which is good. And the benefit of nuclear power is then that not only can we have it in our grid, but it can also help complement renewable generation and help us, reach a 100% zero carbon grid. Because with modern nuclear technologies, not only do they provide the baseload power, so that always on power which isn't dependent on the weather, but with even like Bill Gates, he's invested in this company called TerraPower in the US, which is developing a reactor, which what they'll do with their heat is they'll store the excess heat in these molten salt tanks, which are basically like batteries. So then that heat can be used to create electricity to help fill in for the times where renewables aren't running. So there's multiple aspects to it. And I think the last thing that's really important about nuclear power and how it helps address climate change is that we have to think of the emissions footprint of energy sources in general, because no energy source, even solar panels and wind turbines, has zero carbon emissions as its footprint, because you think of solar panels and wind turbines, all the emissions which are created during manufacturing and also in disposal. And it also, nuclear power plants. Nuclear power plants require concrete, which also has, carbon emissions associated with it. But the benefit of nuclear power is even when you consider all of those different aspects of the broader footprint of the energy source, it still is one of the most competitive technologies with one of the lowest footprints of any energy source, which is in fact, in some cases, lower than renewables like solar panels and wind turbines. And of course, it's far, far better than fossil fuels. And one last fact I'd actually provide is that because of nuclear power displacing fossil fuels, because it is, a clean alternative to, things like coal, nuclear power is actually been estimated to have saved 1.84 million lives.
Wow.
By off-putting fossil fuels and therefore avoiding all of those deaths as a result of pollution, which is, I think, an incredible statistic.
Yeah, and it kind of pays tribute to why we should be bringing this on here at Australia. You've got a petition running at the moment on your website. You've got over 20,000 signatories so far. How many are you trying to get, and how can people sign it if they wish to do so?
Look, as many people as possible. We need to really keep the pressure up, because the fact is the polls suggest that a majority of Australians support nuclear power. It's just that the politicians need to be able to see that for them to realise that they need to be taking steps to lift the bans on nuclear power. So if people support our efforts to have all options on the table and legalise nuclear power, they can sign a petition at nuclearforaustralia.com/petition, or they can head to our social media pages at Nuclear for Australia. We're on Instagram, TikTok, all of those big ones, and then they can sign there.
Fantastic. Will Shackel, it's great to speak to you, and you're a young person doing something absolutely unheard of and fantastic. Well done to you, and thank you for giving us some time today.
Thanks for having me on.
There he is, Will Shackel, joining us today, the founder of Nuclear for Australia.